Call me Dankula. Some time ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no mad lads on my list and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and discuss the watery part of the world. Every seafaring civilization throughout history has been spooked by ships vanishing out in the open ocean, which has given rise to a myriad of legends about creatures preying on sailors out at sea. But a Dracula on a boat was the least of their worries. All manner of monsters and eldritch horrors could be lurking in the deep, waiting to drag them down to Davy Jones' locker. Of course, we know a lot better now about the nature of these beasts, but even today, sailors are a superstitious bunch. And for good reason. Because sometimes the monsters turn out to be real. But while there was nothing to be done about the Kraken, there was one reign of terror where man was eventually able to hold fast and fight back. A whale that terrorised the Byzantine fleet, launching the original ACAB movement. All cetaceans are bastards. The real-life Moby Dick. Porphyrios. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get started, we have a new sponsor. Car Keys Express. We all hate replacing car keys. They're so stuffed with proprietary software and cut with fancy tools that you always have to hoof it all the way to the dealership just to get it done. Well, thanks to the world's largest key replacement company, you don't even have to leave the house to get new car keys because of their service Snap Key. So called because all you have to do is snap a picture of your car key and Car Keys Express will cut and send a copy directly to you, along with a DIY installer to get it quickly and easily paired to your car. And not only does it work for standard, remote and smart keys, but you can also get it done up to 75% cheaper than at the dealership. Car Keys Express also has a customer support team to walk you through the process if you need any help. But if you would rather take a hands-off approach or you simply don't have a key to hand for whatever reason, then you can get a fully trained expert to cut and pair the keys for you. All you have to do is book an appointment with a Car Keys Express technician in one of thousands of locations across the US. So if you need a new car key and you want to support my channel, then click the link in the description box down below to get a 10% discount. Thanks again to Car Keys Express for sponsoring this video. In the 6th century, the Roman Empire was recovering from a phase that we've all known at one time or another. A devastatingly tumultuous relationship with Goths, and like most of us do after they ruin our lives, Rome reinvented herself, becoming the Byzantine Empire seated at Constantinople. This new capital's position, right at the junction between Europe and Asia by both land and sea, made it extremely rich and essentially the trading capital of the Eastern Mediterranean, thanks in no small part to sitting right on the Bosphorus Strait, which was an extremely economically and strategically important connection between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, which led to the Dardanelles Strait, through the Aegean Sea and out into the wider Mediterranean. However, as much of a godsend as the Bosphorus Strait was, the consequences if this shipping lane were ever to be closed would be pretty dire. So, imagine the chaos when an unwanted visitor moved in. The Bosphorus Strait was descended upon by a giant sea monster that seemed to exist solely to indiscriminately attack ships. And by giant, I do mean pretty massive, because the monster was recorded as being 45 feet long and 15 feet wide, making it a huge fucking battering ram that was sinking ships left and right. Sorry, larboard and starboard. As reports of foundered ships made their way back to Constantinople, the name Porphyrios began to catch on, though we're not exactly sure why. There are a few different potential etymologies for this name. There was a famous contemporary charioteer named Porphyrius Calliope and a mythological giant named Porphyrion. And porphyry is a deep royal purple colour which is roughly the shade of the monster's skin. Basically, historians are torn on whether the name is a pop culture reference or just a plain description. But my personal favourite is the latter because Porphyrios translates to purple boy. Though he was probably more interested in krill than muscles. And as tales of Porphyrios' reign of terror spread, passengers noped the fuck out of travelling in a most lubberly fashion, which is to be expected. But even hardened mariners and fishermen were reduced to a blubbering mess. Everyone was scared shitless of taking to the sea because Porphyrios would get them. As a result, the fishing industry took a massive hit because fewer boats were going out and merchant ships were forced to take diversions to avoid the Bosphorus Strait. So trade took a massive hit as everything that wasn't scuttled either took longer to move or just didn't move at all. But can you really blame them? Sailors can abide by many things, but not Porphyrios. Imagine being on your way home after a long voyage, the city's on the horizon, and you're eager to get paid off, and then you just see a purple ripple on the water's surface just ram right through your fucking ship, shattering it to pieces like it's fucking nothing. At least you can defend yourself against Goths and Turks. How the hell do you fight nature itself when it's launching fucking Grond at you? Needless to say, Porphyrios was a massive problem for Constantinople's economy. Maritime commerce was a big deal, and Porphyrios essentially single-finnedly blockaded the capital of the Roman Empire and trading centre of the world. Something had to be done about this creature, and since knowledge is power, the first step to defeating Porphyrios is to know thine enemy. So they decided to look into what the fuck Porphyrios actually was. Well, Porphyrios isn't really some sort of sea monster. As we all know now, monsters aren't real. But if they were, they would work for the government. But back in those days, no one really knew what whales were. So everyone just thought that whales were sea kaijus. Picture being a fisherman who's only ever used to catching salmon and mackerel just for you to see something the size of a fucking bus breaching the surface of the water. And of course, everyone back at the tavern is going to call you a fucking liar. But knowledge of whales was about to become more accepted and widespread because Porphyrios was just a really angry whale. As for what species he is most likely a sperm whale, on account of his reported size and lifespan. Maybe he is, because this doesn't ring entirely true, because sperm whales don't tend to frequent the Bosphorus Strait, because the Black Sea is a bit shallow and sperm whales like really deep water. They are usually found in the Western Mediterranean where the water is actually deep. Which leads some historians to believe that instead, Porphyrios might have been an absolute unit of an orca, a killer whale, which is apt considering the sheer amount of Byzantine sailors that he dragged into the depths. But this theory doesn't quite track with the lifespan, because orcas don't quite have the longevity for a 50-year reign of terror. Granted, Porphyrios often took long breaks and disappeared for a while to keep the sailors on their toes, but this whole saga went on and off for 50 fucking years. That said though, one thing that both species do have in common, which lines up with what we know about Porphyrios, is that they are massive fucking dicks. Look, I know people love whales and see them as mysterious, cosmic, beautiful creatures, but the fact is, most of them are bastards. In addition to the writings of the Byzantine historian Procopius, Porphyrios was actually referenced in Moby Dick, because apparently real recognises real. Through the mouthpiece of Ishmael, Herman Melville voiced tepid support for the sperm whale theory, very verbosely saying, and I quote, "For a long time, I fancied that the sperm whale had been always unknown in the Mediterranean and the deep waters connecting with it. But even now, I am certain that those seas are not, and perhaps can never be, in the present constitution of things, a place for his habitual gregarious resort. But further investigations have recently proved to me that in modern times there have been isolated instances of the presence of the sperm whale in the Mediterranean. So the Byzantines had a whale on their hands, but what did they do about it? Well, legend says that Empress Theodora was particularly irked by Porphyrios because she wasn't fond of Constantinople, and wanting to be able to travel, she enlisted the help of General Belisarius to deal with this problem. He set about the task by praying to the Omnissiah so that he could rig his ship with a catapult to harpoon Porphyrios with the support of archers. Not a bad plan, except it is completely fucking fictional and made up, coming from the 1938 novel Count Belisarius by Robert Graves. In reality, there wasn't much of a plan. Despite once having an empire that entirely surrounded the Mediterranean and having such a mastery of it that it was literally called Our Sea in Latin, the Romans never had much of a naval tradition. Their tactics more or less amounted to lobbing projectiles and Greek fire at enemy ships, which were specifically aimed at enemy crews to thin them out before boarding and fighting hand to hand, rather than trying to disable or sink the ships themselves. So the Byzantines were still very big on unboat your boat tactics, and since you can't exactly board a whale, unless you're John McAfee, Porphyrios had the home field advantage, and the Byzantines were completely out of their depth. But even so, it's worth a shot, isn't it? Why didn't the warships go out and at least protect the fishing and merchant ships? Well, it was probably the naval equivalent of the Roman army seeing an elephant, because Porphyrios didn't give a fuck. He attacked them too. Porphyrios was such a huge problem that he had the attention of Justinian I, the mosaic from the Dark Age edits, who was at a loss for what to do. He really needed this problem nipped in the bud because he had much bigger fish to fry during his reign. While the Justinian dynasty was certainly at the we are so back point in the cycle, the Byzantine Empire never had a moment of peace in its entire existence. So the last thing that he needed was a giant sea monster wiping out over 6,000 litres of olive oil and wine at a time. So he made it a priority to put a stop to Porphyrios' chicanery once and for all. And he declared, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your spears. I am calling for total whale death." Unfortunately, however, it didn't go too well. Justinian the Great, conqueror of much of the lost Roman territory, who brought the Byzantine Empire to its greatest extent, was mogged by a single fucking whale. Eventually, though, the Porphyrios problem sort of just handled itself. One day, Porphyrios beached himself. He beached himself while he was chasing dolphins, and in his thrashing and rolling to try and get himself back in the water, he was actually just moving further and further up the beach and getting stuck in the mud. Soon enough, a crowd of locals noticed him lying there and they all excitedly grabbed their axes. While the Romans always kind of sucked at sea, they seemed to really know how to beach because the locals were in their fucking element as they absolutely wailed on Porphyrios. However, their axes couldn't get through the blubber, and they were just making Porphyrios really, really mad. So they got some ropes and wagons to pull him further up the beach so that he couldn't escape. With Porphyrios completely trapped, the locals then tore him to shreds, cutting off chunks of meat to take home and cook. But some got a little bit carried away and started eating chunks of him raw on the spot. A little bit mental, sure, but woe to the vanquished and all that. In the wake of Porphyrios' demise, the relief of everyone in Constantinople was palpable. With the scourge of the seas finally vanquished after all that time, the Eastern Romans were finally free of this scourge, and able to freely trade, fish, and wage proper war once again. Or were they? Because there are some people that believe that that day on the beach, they got the wrong guy. That wasn't actually Porphyrios. It was just some poor bastard random whale that went through a horrible fucking experience, and it might not have even been the whale that they were looking for. And Porphyrios could still be out there. I mean, he's not. This was over 1,000 years ago, and some whales do live for a very long time, but not that fucking long. But maybe he's the one leading all of the orca attacks over the last few years. But with so many people joining the war against the orcas on the side of the orcas, perhaps we can bury the hatchet, form an alliance, and begin the attack once more. Not to put a chokehold on Constantinople, but to finally liberate it from over half a millennium of barbarian occupation. The Rome posting will continue until the territory improves, but other than getting it all out of my writer's system so that he'll shut the fuck up for a change, I wanted to talk about Porphyrios because the sprawling epics are tiring, and it's nice now and again to make a quick, breezy video every so often. No frou-frou symbolism, just a good, simple tale about an emperor who hates an animal.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody should subscribe!